So thank you everyone for joining our call today. Really appreciate it. So we've got a nice short webinar around what we call Clear Path Investigation. So it's a sister company of ICL. I'm delighted to be joined today by Dominic Human, who's a specialist in investigations. Dominic brings a wealth of experience of over 30 years with the police force. So from that point of view, so if you've done anything naughty, don't tell Dominic from that point of view. But also Dominic's an ex-hostage negotiator, an incredibly highly qualified investigator, and brings a lot of empathy. So you'll hear a lot today when Dominic's speaking, really kind of professional empathy to really show you how to do some good investigations and also the support that's required from that point of view. So we've got a few slides today. Afterwards, we'll send out the slides and the recording and we'll go through from there. So if I put up on the screen, and then we can have a good nose through from that perspective. So let's just put that up on us and we do that. And as we go along, we'll pause at certain bits. If there's any kind of questions on that, put it in the chat function and I'll kind of answer from there. But what we will do is take some questions at the end because I'm sure there'll be quite a few questions for Dominic to go, oh, how would you do this or how would you do that? So first of all, I've met quite a few on the call already, so delighted to see you again and also the work you do already with us. So Clear Path Investigations was born this year. So we saw an ideal part in the market that we wanted good integrity brought to what's called more challenging times for investigations. They're usually more complex, there's more emotions, etc. So we decided as a company to bring out Clear Path Investigations. So super important that it fits within our culture of ICL. So what we look at is pillar 4. So we see holistic progression. This is what we're going to go through today. Of like what we do is lift up the car kind of bonnet, have a good look at the engine, and that's what an investigation does. Is really have a good look from kind of colleague perspectives, and then make some good recommendations. We'll also touch on today pillar 3, which is about training as well from that point of view. So I know you've all wanted to kind of hear from a specialist today. So I'm going to hand over to Dominic. I'm going to do the slides. So just sit back from that point of view. But Dominic, great to have you on board and over to you, mate.
Thanks, Stephen. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. And Stephen, thank you very much for your introduction. I think I was trying to work out, I think I'm up to nearly 40 years experience now. So time ticks on. What I wanted to do today was just to sort of run through some real headlines with you in terms of setting the scene from a national perspective around employment tribunals and where we're at there. And then some really sort of high level thoughts, tips and experiences around getting it right. You know, the title today of Invest to Save is incredibly captures everything really that I find I spend my time talking about, and you'll hear more from me as we go through around that sort of little mantra. So without further ado, Stephen, could we just have the next slide, please? So what I wanted to do is just to give you a little bit of food for thought if you weren't aware, but this is data from the government in terms of employment tribunal backlog and awards. So this is from 2023, 2024. So that's the latest data that's available. But look, a couple of headlines. Outstanding claims in March 2025, 491,000, nearly 500,000 cases still waiting to get into an employment tribunal. That's an increase in that's an increase of 48,000 from the previous year. So we're not seeing the demand on employment tribunals diminish, and therefore we're not seeing requirement for investigations diminishing, and equally importantly about getting those investigations right from the outset. It says there hearing delays, so some cases now being listed into 26, 27. If I tell you that I still have an ongoing case in the employment tribunal system from 2020, that might sort of just help contextualize where we are. Those delays serve no one. Anyone involved in an investigation and an employment tribunal will feel the effects of the events that have happened in the workplace that have led to a claim. Those that are witnesses to certain behaviours will feel it as well, and it will have over time a really detrimental impact on productivity with those people that are worried about these processes. It's not something that you do every day, and so naturally, there's going to be a feeling of a sense of sort of intimidation about the process, and fear and worry that maybe you're going to be criticised by others who are looking at this, remotely and through a different lens. So they're the real headlines that I want to set for you in terms of where we are from a national perspective. Stephen, could we have the next slide, please? And then actually, if we think about what the awards are by claim type. So again, I don't know if if this is going to shock you or not, but there are occasions, quite rightly, where we see direct discrimination, and there is a higher average award for compensation. But if you look at, say, for example, the top one, unfair dismissal, the average award is £13,749. On the scheme of things, that's not a huge amount of money. And the employment tribunals in England and Wales very much focus on a proportionate award based on putting you back to where you would have been had that behaviour not have happened. So if it's been going on a year, you might get a year's pay. But it will also want to understand what you've been doing in that time. Have you been able to work and find other work? And again, the awards will be adjusted accordingly. So when we look at the scheme of that, not huge amounts of money. And of course, that is the award. What we're not taking account of here are legal fees. If you use a solicitor or a barrister, either as an employee or an employer, then of course, those costs are going to go up significantly as well. And we can come back to that in questions as well. That's not a problem at all. Could we just sort of get the next slide? Thank you. Key takeaways from those really are the increased risk and complexity for employers around tribunals. Our memories fade over time. That's natural to all of us. And so actually being asked to recall specific events, maybe some quite fine detailed information and evidence at an employment tribunal that might be sort of 2 years in the future, again can be incredibly challenging and stressful. One of the keys to this, of course, is and we're going to talk about this in terms of the sort of investigation process, is making sure that we write it down, capturing it as we go along. You'll see, as we've talked about, that discrimination cases carry significantly higher financial exposure, and that proactive, inclusive workplace practices and early resolution strategies are essential. I investigate, I also mediate, and I see the benefit of both, but I see an enormous benefit in attempts for early resolution, either through mediation or early resolution through thinking about perhaps a financial package that would allow someone to exit with dignity where appropriate. But we're going to talk really about getting our investigations right. Stephen, if I could have the next slide, please. So I use a little mantra: do it once, do it well. You might go, well, surely it would be do it well, do it once. It doesn't really matter. My point is that these are complex investigations. Even some of the most straightforward things that we might see in the workplace are becoming more and more complex. If we think about the use of technology, we think about the use of social media, for example, it creates an added complexity to our investigation process. So when I say do it once, do it well, I mean do it thoroughly. follow a fair and well-documented investigation process. It protects everybody. It protects you as an investigator, it protects the employer, and it protects the employees involved in it. And most importantly, uphold organisation integrity. You know, sometimes things go wrong. We're all human beings. If we acknowledge that and then take steps to put that right, the vast majority of cases will be resolved. It's as simple and straightforward as that. I talk to an awful lot of people in my work, and many of them, those that have raised grievances particularly, so I just want someone to say they're sorry, to acknowledge that there's been some harm, and then for us to find a way forward. It's not about the money. It's not about anything else other than an acknowledgement of harm and stopping it from happening and moving forward. That helps us, of course, reduce the risk, because if we find an opportunity, and I would suggest we would need to do some form of investigation, even if we're thinking about the mediation route, or thinking about settlement, we would want some form of investigation, but it helps to reduce the risk associated with somebody raising a grievance and it not being properly dealt with. My work these days sadly involves going into organisations where things have gone wrong from an investigation perspective. Perhaps we haven't followed policy or procedure. Perhaps we've not demonstrated a fair process because we've made an emotional connection, perhaps with someone that's raised a grievance. And that has blurred the lines in terms of what our role and function is as an investigator. And it's incredibly challenging. There's no two ways about it. It's incredibly challenging. As we work through an investigation, we are going to encounter people with high levels of emotion. We're going to see people that are crying and upset. We're going to hear about devastation of impact, personal impact on individuals and their family. And it would be very natural and easy to get absorbed by that and then follow a pathway to make the evidence fit the allegation. We have to remain detached, not cold and not compassionate, but we have to remain detached, and we have to revisit the evidence consistently to make sure that we've done a thorough investigation, that we've looked at all avenues that are reasonable and possible to us. And sometimes that comes up short. And that can be really difficult for you as an investigator. And it can be a very difficult message to send to someone that you've perhaps met for the first time, who was in floods of tears and clearly upset and anxious about what had happened to them. But if you don't, you're not serving the investigation process well. And this is where things go wrong. And this is where we see then opportunities for further action, further disappointment, or claims around constructive dismissal, for example, or discrimination. So upholding integrity, organisational integrity, personal integrity will naturally help to reduce the risk. Hence why I say do it once, do it well. Stephen, could I have the next slide, please? So first and foremost, what are we talking about for an investigation? Well, we've got to define the process. What does it look like? What's a fair procedure? I imagine many of you from organisations will have a grievance policy, a discipline policy. So there's something to refer to. What do we do in these circumstances? And there'll be something documented there. First thing to do is to find it, read it, and follow it, to make sure that you are acting fairly. What, in terms of what the role of the investigator is essentially you are fact-finding. You are there to follow a pathway, whichever direction that takes you, hence Stephen's clear path investigations. We follow the pathway to make sure that we get the evidence, we secure the evidence. If it's digital, we need to make sure that we act promptly, for example, to make sure that it's not lost or wiped after 28 days, as many organisations will have policies for. We've got to make sure, we've got to be clear about what it is we're investigating and equally what we're not investigating. So establishing some really clear terms of reference is absolutely vital from the outset. Now, these terms of reference, essentially, this is what I am looking at. These are the allegations. This is what I'm looking at. But you need to document them because they help to keep you on track. Now, it's not to say that at any point during an investigation, if you uncover additional allegations or things that really do need to be looked at and included in that investigation, you revisit your terms of reference and you add to them as appropriate. The key thing here is that we've got we've got an audit trail that says this is what we started with. As we went through our investigation, this came to light. And so we've added now these additional areas that we're going to investigate. If we go too generalist from the outset, then of course we could be open to accusations of going on what I describe as a fishing expedition. You know, we throw the net wide and we see what we come up with at the end of it. So we've got to be very specific and very clear about those terms of reference. And of course, we've got to be transparent, neutral, and procedurally consistent. So the transparency element is, again, we're not here conducting criminal investigations. We are here dealing with matters in the workplace that require us to work on a balance of probabilities. Is it more likely than not that a behaviour occurred or the alleged action occurred? And in order to do that, we need to follow, we need to be transparent in terms of our communication with those that are involved in it. I'm not here to make a judgment of an individual. I'm here to investigate, and there's a big difference. And that can be the challenge. I might not connect with an individual in one of my investigations. Doesn't matter. Put that to one side. Because if I allow it to affect my neutrality, then it's affecting my transparency as well, because then I'm starting to look for things that fit a predetermined narrative, rather than being an open book and open-minded to follow the path that I'm taking along that journey of that investigation. And the procedural consistency, again, is so important. We might label, someone as a complainant, and we might label someone as a perpetrator. Those labels are only useful from a perspective of who am I talking to about what. They make no difference in terms of your approach to those individuals. You act with integrity. You don't make a judgment. And you give everybody a fair opportunity through procedural consistency to have their say. And again, that can be incredibly challenging for an individual as an investigator, because we have to change our mindset. Some things may come up short. We might not like that as an investigator. We might not like that from a grievance perspective, but that is the reality. And that's where we have to have honest conversations with ourselves and honest conversations with those that are involved in the investigation. Can I have the next slide, please, Dave? So again, when we're thinking about structuring the investigation, the key principles: objectivity, clarity, timeliness. I think I've talked about the objectivity. Clarity. You as the investigator need to be sure that you've properly understood the information. It may be that, for example, I work with lots of different organisations, so lots of little different acronyms come in. I ask what they mean. And it might sound basic and straightforward, but you need to understand. Never put a presupposition into that. So you clarify. You summarise as well. to make sure that what you feel you've heard is actually what's being said. And I use that exact terminology. If I could just summarize what I feel I've heard you say is, I'm inviting someone to either agree, and therefore it's a demonstration of me that I've been actively listening, or I'm inviting them to correct me so that actually I don't keep that misunderstanding in my mind. It's corrected very quickly. And the timeliness. We've talked about that in terms of some evidence that's required. But look, as soon as this process starts, as soon as we get a grievance, as soon as we start investigating human response and behaviour, that we're going to be affected by it. I sometimes talk about there not being winners in investigation. And to clarify what I mean by that is anybody that's wrapped up in a grievance in an internal investigation, discipline matter, will be in a heightened sense of anxiety. It will affect them and their well-being. It will affect their productivity at work. And of course, in the middle of all this, we've got people who probably have had significant trauma or mental health considerations, well-being considerations. And those are stalled, and any sense of recovery is stalled until your investigation is over. And so absolutely the timeliness is about is making sure that we do what we need to do as quickly as possible, but not cut corners. Then move on to creating a robust investigation plan. Essentially, if we do this at the outset, these are our terms of reference. And then we're looking around what the allegations are and what we might need to seek to see if we can secure as evidence. Then an investigation plan is vital to that. The priorities would be things that could potentially be lost in terms of audio, video, those sort of things. Swipe card data for access to buildings is another one that I've encountered fairly regularly. So it helps us prioritize what do we need to secure. And then essentially the order in which we're going to conduct our investigation. Now, obviously, we want to speak to the person that's raised the allegation. We want to fully understand ourselves directly from them what exactly has happened. We're also going to want to understand the impact on them at the time and the impact subsequently. We're going to want to understand who else has been affected. It might be family, it might be friends, it might be work colleagues, any number of people there. And then we're going to want to understand what a good outcome looks like for those individuals. And we really need to get that, understand that from the outset. It's important because essentially I've conducted a number of investigations where they've come to me as a formal process, and then I speak to the person that's raised the grievance and said, I'd really like to sit down with the other person and just tell them how they made me feel. Well, okay, thanks. What that helps us to make sure that we conduct a proportionate investigation with the ultimate aim of bringing those parties together to have a mediation and a discussion and a way of moving forward. The other side of that, conversely, would be those that would say, well, I want them disciplined and I want them sacked. And actually the allegations don't meet the criteria for gross misconduct. It would be a misconduct. And so there's an opportunity to help manage those expectations from the outset as well. Once you've conducted that meeting with the person that's raised the grievance, you've got a number of options. But I'm going to encourage you today to think about this. Is the next person you speak to the person that's alleged to have done the behaviour? There's a huge amount of value in doing that. Huge amount of value, because actually we might meet with them and they say, yeah, do you know what, that did happen. I'm reflecting on that. Yeah, I need to put that right. Yes, I acknowledge that. That again helps us to establish a proportionate investigation. If we've got another 10 witnesses to speak to, do we need to talk to all 10? If actually the person that's alleged to have done the behaviour has acknowledged it, we might want to speak to one or two more. But again, it helps us prioritise and then create that proportionate sense of investigation. And we revisit it. So we track progress. So mine are always dated. This is what I want to have completed by this day. And then I use a simple red, amber, green tracking status to show where I am in my investigation. And of course, all of that is talking about that last point there around identifying stakeholders, timelines, and evidence sources. So I've sort of talked through that and covered that from what we've already spoken about. Stephen, could we have the next slide, please? And then, of course, part of the role of investigator is assessing risk. And it says here, providing support, identifying the need for support. So recognising emotional, reputational and legal risks. The emotional element of this, of any investigation, will come through. There's no doubt about it. If we demonstrate empathy as an investigator, we will see the emotional impact on those involved in the alleged behaviour. We've also got to think a little bit wider as well in terms of reputational risks to the organisation, and then the legal element, the legal risks of perhaps leaving themselves open to employment in tribunal claims, civil court claims. We've got to identify where parties need support, and it says they're offering appropriate support. It's identifying that support and making sure that people are signposted. Many organisations now will have an outsourced EAP access for staff to access support for a variety of reasons. And you should always make sure that within your correspondence that you remind people of the availability of that. So rather than feeling that this is your responsibility to provide counselling or ongoing emotional support, it's about the identification and the signposting to where that can best be delivered. And then managing confidentiality and well-being throughout. I've talked about no one goes through these processes, these investigations, without being affected by it in some way. So, so we've got to think about everybody's well-being, and we've also got to make sure that things remain confidential. One of the most difficult things is the confidentiality, and I find that time and time again, but perhaps when there are a number of witnesses, because essentially I talk to witnesses who then describe what they've heard. Someone else tell about that situation rather than their own account and their own version of those events. So confidentiality from the outset is absolutely crucial as we move through the process. Stephen, can we have the next slide, please? One of the key skills of an investigator is being able to demonstrate empathy, emotional intelligence, and active listening skills, and your neutrality. The active listening skills are really important because essentially in a normal conversation, it goes like a game of tennis. It's my turn, your turn, my turn, your turn, and then eventually that finishes. In active listening mode, when it's my turn, my contribution needs to be really minimal. So I might nod, I might smile, I might say okay, but that is my contribution because I want the other person to be talking so that I get the full picture of what's happening. And there's a real skill to active listening, and then potentially moving on to much more detailed structure of interviewing through cognitive framework, but that's a really specialist area. And we need to be curious. We need to be professionally curious. This is one of the key things. Not accusational. But we need to be professionally curious, which means that we need to ask and probe. But we don't have to do it in such a way that we might have seen an interrogation on the television or something like that. This is about making a professional inquiry. Could you tell me more about that? Could you explain why you were thinking that? They're non-judgmental in their approach, and it helps to maintain your impartiality and create the environment where someone is willing to share that information with you. Stephen, next slide, please. Compiling your evidence and report writing. So again, what we need to do is use clear professional language, simple, straightforward language. Some of the best reports I've seen, some of the best reports I've written have not been 30 pages long. They've been 8 pages, but they have been focused, and they have been provided the clarity. They're telling a story. Essentially, you are telling the story as the investigator. This is what I started with. This is what I was asked to do. This is how I went about it with my investigation plan. And this is what I found, and this is what I established. And then you follow the evidence. So you don't ever give your opinion. You'd say the evidence indicates that this did occur or that didn't occur, because you have to determine whether there's a case to answer. And essentially, you've got to justify your decision making and your conclusions with a clear audit trail. You might well be challenged on it, and that's fine. We should expect that as investigators. The point is that we need to very clearly document why we've reached the decision. So essentially, the bit there is we treat it like a maths problem. It's not just showing the answer, but how you got there, what steps you took to do that. And remember, you are working on a balance of probabilities. Is it more likely than not that a behaviour happened or didn't happen, or the allegation can be proved or not? You're only looking at, you start on 50-50, you're only looking at 50.1% more likely than not, one way or the other. So it can be incredibly challenging as an investigator in certain circumstances, and you need to be mindful of that. Which is why you need not to be risk adverse. If it's there and you feel it's there, then you've got to say so. We've got to do justice to the process and to those that are involved in it. I'm mindful of the time, Stephen. Could we just move on? So, having said all of that, and that's a real whistle stop, this is an investigation. I just wanted to, I thought it might be timely just to think about Christmas party season, a seasonal reminder, if you like. Incredibly important always, but even more so now that the additional responsibilities placed on employers to create a safe environment for its employees, particularly around sexual harassment. So there's some really simple steps that you can take. Pre-party communications, clarifying expectations. Essentially, I liken a works Christmas party to an extension of the workday. If you wouldn't say it in the office, you're not saying it at the Christmas party. It's as simple and straightforward as that. Reinforce the workplace policies on behaviour and boundaries so that we're really, really clear with everybody beforehand. Not to be a party pooper, not to say you can't have fun, but just to minimise the potential risk of something going wrong. Encourage inclusivity and avoid work-related discussions. We're there to celebrate, looking forward to Christmas. We don't want to talk about, oh, I'm pleased I caught up with you. I needed to talk to you about this meeting, etc., etc. So, that's we need to avoid those, because again, what happens is we bring in the hierarchy of organisations in those discussions, and at that moment in time, we're there to enjoy a social event. And as Nikki quite rightly said, it's not just for Christmas; it's any sort of social event. So that's really important. And then we've got to remind the managers of their additional responsibility. You have responsibility within that social environment. If you can see that someone is maybe drinking too much or becoming a bit loud, there is a responsibility on you to try and deal with that behaviour there and then, nip it in the bud. And that doesn't absolve itself because you've had a drink or whatever. You know, you've got to make sure that you keep your responsibilities throughout. Next slide, please, Stephen. And then just here, a sort of whistle-stop ACAS guidance, legal reminder around sexual harassment, protected under the Equality Act of 2010. It applies to employees, workers, contracts, and job applicants. So again, thinking wider than those that are just, act immediately in your office, for example. It may be that you've got some contractors that would also come to a social event, and we need to make sure that we understand that applies there. Define unwanted behaviour of a sexual nature. We don't want behaviour that violates people's dignity. We don't want behaviour that creates a hostile, degrading, or offensive environment. And it's not the intent that's required. That's not the benchmark. Oh, I didn't intend it to be like that. It's the impact. It's how the person on the other side of that received it. So no longer do we have a get out clause of, well, I didn't mean it like that. So if they're taking it like that's their responsibility. No, this is very firmly and quite rightly, the impact on that individual matters. We're all unique human beings. No one else like us in the world. We are moulded by our experiences throughout life. And what might be acceptable to one person isn't going to be acceptable to everyone. And we need to be careful and mindful of that as we navigate our way through this. Stephen, next slide, please. And there we go. End of course reflections. It is an absolute whistle stop. But the key things are investor safe. Do it right up front. Do it right from the outset. Have the right people. Not everybody is going to have the right skill set and the right approach to these investigations to be able to do them well. So we need to pick up people carefully. Do it once, do it well. Thinking about not only about that being a professional way of conducting investigations, but thinking about minimising the impact on everyone involved in those investigations during the course of that time. And the reminder in terms of this is not a quick fix. If these things go to employment tribunal, you're looking, a backlog of nearly 500,000 cases right here, right now. Thank you very much for your attention. Any questions? I know there was some chat.
So I'll go to the chat now, Dom. So Dom, thank you ever so much from that point of view. And that's why Dominic's a specialist in that field. So really, really good. So I'll just have a look at the chat. So Nikki saying about a case being scheduled 2028. So from that point of view, poor old Amy had to drop out from that point of view. And we had Holly there as well. There's also a lot of trauma that's in kind of that goes along with that point of view, and it's not just about your trauma as the colleague; it's about the family that's involved as well. Patsy put on there not just Christmas parties, but any work event. Yeah, spot on, Patsy, where alcohol is involved. But we've also got to make sure that line managers have that responsibility. You can't just walk away from it from that point of view. If that makes sense. Does that make sense, Patsy? We can't.
It does. We brought in a policy a couple of years ago around this because there's been a few incidences where particularly where there's been alcohol involved, and so we've got a policy in place now for that. For any work related event.
And I love the bit Dominic touched on earlier, that if you're not going to say it in work, you're not going to say it in the parties. That's really important from that point of view. So I just want to say, because I'm conscious of time, thank you for everyone joining today. Really, really appreciate it. We've had other people that want us to send out afterwards. Dominic, thank you ever so much for your time and wisdom. All we would say is please reach out if you want any help and support around training, development, for that aspect, to really make sure you're a really good investigator, but also disciplinary hearings or grievance or even supervision. We're there to help from that point of view, because it is a more complex area and we're playing with people's emotions and feelings. So I just want to say a huge thank you for joining today. Dominic, once again, thank you for joining. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the time and has a good Christmas party coming up, if that makes sense. So thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Thank you. Bye.